one of the most important but least talked about things pertaining to economic development is waterways. If you look at the most powerful countries, their proximity to water, ports, and navigational waterways is very pertinent in that rise. If you notice here on the map, the United States borders three major bodies of water. Over here to the west, you have the Pacific, which is the world's largest ocean. Over to the east, over here, you have the Atlantic Ocean. And down here in the southeast, you have the Gulf of Mexico. When you have these major waterways, which are around your country, you can distribute goods here, here, here. Los Angeles actually has the world's largest port. It also makes naval invasions very difficult. People can see you from close proximity. Because of waterways, that's why you've seen a huge rise in a lot of these Asian countries because of their proximity to the Pacific Ocean, which is the world's largest ocean. It's approximately 63 million square miles, and it contains more than half of the free water on Earth. It is by far the largest of the world's oceans. Interesting fact, explorer Fernand Magellan named the Pacific Ocean in the 16th century. He called this body of water Pacific due to the calmness of the water at the time. Pacific means peaceful. This was the first known crossing of the Pacific Ocean in 1521. This was a Spanish expedition led by Portuguese navigator Fernand Magellan. Magellan also circumnavigated the entire world. He was the first person to do that. He died in the expedition, but 11 people of his crew actually successfully circumnavigated the universe. Pretty interesting stuff. The Pacific extends from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the Southern Ocean in the south and is bounded by the continents of Asia and Australia in the west and the Americas in the east. The equator divides the Pacific Ocean into the North Pacific Ocean and the South Pacific Ocean. The size of the Pacific Ocean is bigger than the total size of the landmass of all the continents together. You see right here the total size. Right here is Europe. Over here, and then down this way is Africa. Over here is Asia. You put all these together, the entire landmass, it is still smaller than the Pacific Ocean. All this area right here is the Pacific Ocean. The world is 70% water. We know all that. And over 25% of that water is the Pacific Ocean. The Mariana Trench, which is located to the west of the Philippines and north of New Guinea, is the deepest point in the Pacific Ocean, with 35,827 feet. It is the lowest part of the Earth's crust and was formed by the collision of the Earth's crust of two tectonic plates. 75% of all volcanoes on Earth are located in the Pacific Ocean basin, so in the geographic area of the Pacific Ocean. The volcanoes form a ring around the basin, and it's referred to as the Ring of Fire. Many earthquakes happen in the area due to volcanic activity. Temperature. It depends on the location. The nearer to the equator, the warmer the water tends to be. In some regions, the water is up to 86 degrees, while near to the poles, the water temperature decreases to the freezing point. In the warm area, abundant sea life such as dolphins, fish, and snails can be found. Most of the islands in the world are found in the Pacific region. There are actually more than 25,000 islands in the Pacific. Here is where we now get to international trade and the development of a lot of these countries. Even today, more than half of international trade is done through water. Since the mid-20th century, there has been remarkable growth in trade between the Western Pacific Rim, most notably China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and North America. Trade patterns in the United States have shifted, with Pacific countries now accounting for a major portion of overall trade. Thus, the Pacific Ocean supports some of the world's most important trade routes. Most of the exports moving from west to east and from north to south are high-value added manufactured goods, while most of the exports moving from east to west and from south to north are raw materials and light manufacturers. The largest port is now in Long Beach, California. You see right here, you can ship the goods into this area right here, right off the coast of California. That is where the largest area is. Speaking of these countries right here, like China, they have the East China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. In that same area, you also saw San Francisco Bay. They also have a large port there, in the Puget region in Washington. In the Western Pacific, Japan's ports in Tokyo and Osaka Bay dominate trade. You see right here, the Pacific Ocean. See these areas right here? These ports are where they ship in the goods to Japan. Other trade ports include Busan in South Korea and Shanghai in China. You see right there, there is Shanghai. And there's another port in Taiwan. All of this right here. And Sydney in Australia. There you go. There's Sydney, Australia right there. As a effect or a consequence, I guess you could say, China has been the largest exporter of goods in the world since 2009. Official estimates suggest the country's total exports amounted to 2.641 trillion in 2019. As a consequence as well, the United States has become the largest importer of goods. In 2018, the US imported 2.5 trillion worth of goods. It also has to do with trade policy, but this video is not about that. It's more or less about the geographic location, the Pacific Ocean, and proximity to coastlines, which lead to economic development. We often hear the reason the United States was successful was because of slavery, sexism, racism, all these other isms. But the truth of the matter is, you even see the rise of places like Taiwan and China because of their proximity to the Pacific Ocean. But understanding geography, understanding coastlines, understanding ports and international trade actually takes thinking instead of just saying racist, sexist, homophobic, which is an easy thing to do. One last point to the hypothesis. So you see right here, Rome. Rome at one point owned all these areas around here. Well, look at their proximity to the sea, all of the bases, all the ports they could use. Even Egypt has the Nile River. All of the big cities are close to large rivers, whether it is the Hudson in New York or whether it is the Thames in London. That's just the way things operate. You also factor in the soil. The United States is in the temperate zone. They have all kinds of different types of soil, rainfall, these other factors. that Africa does not have. The reason Africa is so backwards is not only because they don't have a lot of coastlines, but rainfall, navigational waterways, soil, disease, and all these other factors. Again, you have to actually read, you have to actually do your research instead of just being ignorant and accounting everything to racism, sexism, and colonialism. If you actually look at European colonialism, it had its problems, don't get me wrong. The Europeans were terrible in some areas, but also it brought the use of a plow, it brought modern medicine economically. Just like when Rome would take over an area, it actually made that area a little bit better pertaining to productivity and things like that. If you look at when these areas got their independence, they actually became a little bit worse off economically, politically, because they were unstable. A stable regime is also important for economic development, but that's all I got right now.